Giant mail-order bride rejected for being too fat, until the Amish man said, "She's perfect." Snow whirls across a Nebraska rail town as a trembling bride steps off the train. She traveled for days, her heart full of hope, only to be laughed at, mocked, and rejected in front of the whole town. "Too fat," they jeer as her dreams collapse into dust. But when the jeers grow loud, one man steps forward. A plain-clothed Amish widower. His voice cuts through the crowd. "She's perfect." The townsfolk freeze. A woman the world called worthless suddenly finds a champion. But the winter prairie holds darker trials, syndicate riders, false arrests, and the weight of shame she has carried all her life. As she learns to fight for his land, his children, and her own worth, will this so-called giant bride remain a mark of ridicule, or rise as the heart that saves them all? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The afternoon wind whipped snow across the railway platform, stinging Isabel's cheeks as she gripped her carpet bag tighter. Her legs trembled, partly from the cold and partly from the cruel laughter that still echoed in her ears. The rancher's words had cut deeper than the winter chill. Too fat to be of use. Those 5 words had shattered the dreams she'd carried with her on the long journey from Oklahoma Territory. Tears threatened to freeze on her face as she turned away from the crowd, their whispers following her like shadows. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Hold your head high, little one. Your worth isn't measured by others' sight." But right now, holding her head high felt impossible as more townspeople gathered to witness her shame. Someone in the crowd called out, "Guess you'll be heading back east." Another voice added, "Or maybe find yourself a blind husband." More laughter rippled through the onlookers. Isabel's fingers clutched the cross hanging beneath her collar, a gift from her Cherokee grandmother. The metal felt cold against her skin, grounding her in this moment of humiliation. She had spent her last dollars on the train ticket, believing the rancher's letters that promised a fresh start. Now she stood alone, in a strange town, with nowhere to go. The sound of steady boots crunching through snow made her stiffen. She braced herself for more mockery, but instead a calm, firm voice cut through the winter air. "She's perfect." The crowd fell silent. Isabel turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through tear-blurred eyes, she saw a tall man in a plain, dark coat and broad-brimmed hat. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes steady and kind beneath the brim of his hat. He stood with quiet dignity, one hand extended toward her. "I'm Liam Stoltzfus," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now hushed platform. "And any woman willing to brave winter trains and strange towns to build a new life has courage worth more than gold." Isabel stood frozen, studying his face for any sign of mockery, but she found none. His eyes held only sincerity, and a gentle strength that reminded her of her father's steady gaze. The rancher who had rejected her stepped forward, his face red with anger or embarrassment. "Now see here, Stoltzfus, you can't just—" "I can and I will," Liam interrupted, his quiet voice carrying an authority that silenced the other man. "The Lord teaches us to see with the heart, not with eyes clouded by pride." He kept his hand extended toward Isabel, patient and unwavering. A small gasp escaped Isabel's lips as she recognized the Pennsylvania Dutch accent in his words. Her mother had often spoken of the Amish people's kindness when their family had traveled through Pennsylvania years ago. Something in her chest loosened, a knot of fear beginning to unwind. Snow continued to swirl around them as the crowd watched in stunned silence. The moment stretched like pearled taffy, sweet but fragile. Isabel took one small step forward, then another. Her hand trembled as she reached out to accept his offered help. "I'm Isabel," she managed to whisper, her voice scratchy from unshed tears. "Welcome to Nebraska, Isabel," Liam replied, and though his expression remained serious, warmth filled his words. He gestured to a simple wagon loaded with farm supplies. "My homestead's a few miles out. There's room for another passenger if you've nowhere else to be." The murmuring crowd began to disperse, some looking ashamed, others still wearing smirks. But Isabel barely noticed them now. She found herself drawn to the quiet strength in Liam's presence, so different from the cruel rejection she'd faced moments before. As he helped her up onto the wagon seat, she caught sight of his hands, strong, work-worn hands that spoke of honest labor. He wrapped a thick wool blanket around her shoulders before climbing up beside her. The gesture was simple, but filled with more kindness than she'd known from strangers in a long while. "Much obliged," she said softly, pulling the blanket closer against the cold. Her grandmother's teachings about dignity and grace echoed in her mind, helping her straighten her spine despite the day's wounds. Liam clicked his tongue at the horses, and the wagon began to move through the snowy streets. The last thing Isabel saw as they left the station was the rancher who had rejected her, standing alone on the platform, looking somehow smaller than before. The wooden wagon wheels creaked through the fresh snow, and Isabel found herself wondering what twist of fate had brought her to this moment. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time since stepping off the train, she felt something like hope stirring in her heart. The wagon wheels crunched through fresh snow as Liam guided Isabel away from the train platform. Her hands still trembled as she clutched her carpet bag, the cruel laughter of the townsfolk echoing in her ears. Behind them, voices muttered and whispered, some in disapproval, others in disbelief. "Why?" Isabel finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you defend me back there?" Liam adjusted the reins in his work-worn hands, his expression thoughtful beneath his broad-brimmed hat. "Because it was right," he said simply. The words carried no judgment, just quiet conviction. He helped her onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. "I have a farm about 3 miles outside town," he explained, clicking his tongue at the horses. "I'm a widower, raising my sister's 2 little ones." "She and her husband." His voice trailed off, the pain still evident. "Well, the children need looking after." Isabel twisted her hands in her lap. She had come all this way to marry another man, one who had rejected her so cruelly. Now here she sat beside a stranger who had shown her more kindness in 5 minutes than she had known in years. The town offered no welcome, no shelter. Only this quiet man with gentle eyes had reached out. The wagon rolled past the edge of town, where buildings gave way to winter-bare fields stretched thin against the horizon. Snow dusted the frozen furrows, and fence posts stood like lonely sentinels marking property lines. Isabel noticed how Liam's land seemed to stretch out lean and long, the soil looking tired even under its blanket of white. "It ain't much," Liam said, as if reading her thoughts, "but it's honest ground." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows by the time they reached the farmhouse. It was a sturdy structure of weathered wood, with smoke curling from the chimney. A barn stood off to one side, and a chicken coop huddled against the winter wind. As Liam helped her down from the wagon, movement caught Isabel's eye. 2 small faces peered around the farmhouse door, a girl with serious eyes and a younger boy half hidden behind his sister. "Mary Jonas," Liam called gently. "Come meet Miss Isabel." The children emerged slowly. Mary, the older girl, looked to be about 10 years old, with her hair neatly braided and her simple dress carefully pressed. She carried herself like a little mother, protective of her younger brother. Jonas, who appeared to be 7, clung to his sister's skirts, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Hello," Isabel said softly, trying to smile through her exhaustion. The children reminded her of spring rabbits, ready to dart away at the slightest wrong move. "Are you staying for supper?" Mary asked, her voice careful and measured beyond her years. Liam rested a gentle hand on his niece's shoulder. "Miss Isabel needs a place to rest tonight. We'll figure out tomorrow when it comes." Inside the farmhouse was, simple but tidy, a pot of stew bubbled on the wood stove, filling the air with the smell of vegetables and broth. Mary moved with quiet efficiency, setting out tin plates and cups while Jonas helped by placing spoons beside each setting. Liam lit the oil lamp as dusk gathered outside the windows. The yellow light cast warm shadows on the plank walls as they sat down to their evening meal. The bread was plain but fresh, and the stew, though simple, filled Isabel's empty stomach. She watched the small family as they ate. Mary mothered her brother, wiping a drop of stew from his chin. Liam blessed the food with reverent words, his faith as natural as breathing. They spoke little, but the silence felt comfortable rather than strained. Yet Isabel couldn't shake the feeling of being both out of place and somehow needed. She noticed the missing buttons on Jonas's shirt, the way Mary's young shoulders carried too much responsibility. The house itself seemed to whisper of absence. Empty hooks by the door, a rocking chair gathering dust in the corner. Her grandmother's words came back to her. God never closes a door without opening a window. Perhaps this was her window, though it looked nothing like the future she had imagined when she boarded that train. As Jonas shyly pushed the bread basket towards her, offering seconds, Isabel felt something shift in her heart. These children, this quiet man, this weathered house, they had offered her dignity when others had only given shame. Maybe that was worth more than all the promises in those letters she had carried so hopefully in her carpet-bag. The winter sunrise painted the Nebraska prairie in shades of pearl and gold. Frost sparkled on every fence post and blade of dried grass, transforming the barren landscape into a glittering wonderland. Inside the small guest room of the Stoltzfus farmhouse, Isabel stirred at the sound of roosters crowing their morning greeting. She sat up in the narrow bed, pulling the patchwork quilt closer against the chill. Through the window, she could see her breath forming delicate clouds in the cold air. The events of yesterday, the cruel rejection at the train station, Liam's unexpected kindness, felt almost like a dream. The floorboards creaked softly beneath her feet as she dressed quickly in her warmest dress. Following the scent of coffee and wood smoke, she made her way to the kitchen where she found Liam, already stoking the cook-stove. Mary stood at his elbow, her small face serious as she stirred a pot of oatmeal. "Good morning," Isabel said softly, not wanting to startle them. Jonas looked up from where he sat at the table, his eyes bright. "Pa says you're staying with us today," he announced, then quickly ducked his head when Mary gave him a stern look. "If that's agreeable," Liam said, straightening up from the stove. "At least until you decide your next step." Isabel nodded, grateful for his careful way of leaving the choice to her. As they settled around the table for breakfast, she noticed how the children watched her every move, curious but cautious, like young deer at the edge of a clearing. After the meal, Isabel rolled up her sleeves. "Would you like to learn how to make bread?" she asked the children. "My mother taught me her special way with the dough." Mary's eyes lit up, though she tried to hide her excitement. "We usually have store bread," she admitted. "Since Mama—" she trailed off, looking at her hands. "Well then, let's get started," Isabel said briskly, heading off the sad moment. She gathered flour and the other ingredients, showing them how to measure and mix. Soon, the kitchen filled with the sounds of their work. The soft thump of dough on the wooden board, Jonas's giggle as flour dusted his nose, Mary's careful questions about kneading technique. Through the window, Isabel could see Liam in the yard, bent over his tools. The metallic ring of his hammer echoed across the frozen ground as he repaired what looked like a broken plow blade. Later, while the bread rose in its pan near the stove's warmth, Isabel wrapped herself in her shawl and walked the property. The land stretched out before her, beautiful but harsh. She noticed empty well buckets standing beside a dry creek bed, their presence telling a worrying tale. Liam found her there, studying the parched ground. "Water's our biggest trouble," he explained, his voice heavy with concern. "Railroad built a dam upstream last spring. The cattle syndicate bought water rights after that. Between them both, they've near dried us out." Isabel nodded thoughtfully. "My Cherokee grandmother knew ways of finding water others missed," she said. "She taught me about storing melted snow in underground cisterns lined with clay. And there are signs that tell of hidden springs, certain plants that only grow where water runs deep." Liam listened intently, his expression brightening with interest. But then his face grew serious again. "That knowledge could help us survive," he said. "But I should warn you, the syndicate don't take kindly to farmers who try to work around their control. Things can turn ugly fast." "I've seen ugly before," Isabel replied quietly, thinking of yesterday's humiliation at the station. Sometimes you have to stand your ground anyway. As evening approached, the fresh-baked bread filled the house with its homey scent. They gathered around the table, steam rising from their bowls of beans and ham. Jonas couldn't stop reaching for just one more slice of warm bread, making Liam shake his head in amused resignation. When the meal was done, Isabel began to hum softly as she helped Mary with the dishes. The tune became a hymn her mother had sung to her, one about God's faithful provision. Soon both children were listening, their movements slowing as the peaceful melody filled the kitchen. Looking up, she caught Liam watching her, a warm smile softening his usually serious face. It transformed him, that smile, making him look younger and less burdened. Something fluttered in Isabel's chest, but she quickly turned back to the dishes. Later, as lamplight cast its gentle glow through the farmhouse windows, Isabel sat in her small room. The day had brought its share of grace, the children's eager hands in bread dough, Liam's smile, the satisfaction of being useful. Yet questions still hung in the air like the frost outside. What would tomorrow bring? Where did she truly belong? She offered up a quiet prayer of gratitude for this refuge, even if it proved temporary. Morning sunlight glinted off fresh snow as Liam's wagon rolled toward town, the wooden wheels crunching over frozen ruts in the road. Isabel sat beside him on the hard bench, her thick woolen shawl wrapped tight against the chill. The children had stayed behind with strict instructions from Liam to mind the house and tend to their chores. "We'll need flour, sugar, and coffee," Liam said, checking his list. "Maybe some penny candy for the little ones, if you think that's not too frivolous." Isabel smiled at his careful consideration. "A small treat now and then brings joy," she said. "My grandmother always said that." As they approached the busy street, heads turned to watch their passage. Isabel felt the familiar weight of stairs pressing against her back. She heard the whispers start, like dry leaves skittering across wooden walkways. "That's her, the fat bride nobody wanted. Can you believe she's staying with the Amish widower?" Isabel lifted her chin, remembering Liam's words at the train station. "She's perfect." Those simple words had given her armor against cruel tongues. She wouldn't let them see her crumble now. The general store. Bell jingled as they entered. Mr. Peterson, the shopkeeper, nodded curtly at Liam, but barely glanced at Isabel. She busied herself examining shelves while Liam discussed his order, trying to ignore the curious looks from other customers. The heavy tread of boots on the wooden floor announced Deputy Crowder's arrival. His badge caught the light as he strode toward them, official papers clutched in his hand. Through the store window, Isabel noticed several well-dressed men watching from across the street, smugness evident in their postures. "Stoltzfuss," Crowder drawled. "Got some business with you." He thrust the papers at Liam's chest. "Notice of pending seizure. Railroad's filing claim on that piece of land you've been squatting on." Liam's face remained calm, though his fingers tightened on the papers. "That land was deeded to me proper and legal," he said quietly. "Been farming it 7 years now." The deputy's lip curled. "Well, seems there might be some question about them deeds. Railroad's got their own paperwork showing prior claim." He glanced at Isabel, his eyes moving over her dismissively. "Might want to think careful about taking on any additional responsibilities just now." Heat rose in Isabel's cheeks, but she stood straight and still, refusing to shrink from his implied insult. Across the street, the syndicate men chuckled among themselves. "We'll be going now," Liam said firmly, placing coins on the counter for their purchases. He gathered their supplies while Isabel carried the smaller packages. They loaded the wagon in silence, feeling the weight of watching eyes. The return journey stretched long before them, winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-dusted prairie. Finally, Liam spoke. "I've got the deeds," he said. "Clear as day, signed and witnessed proper. But Deputy Crowder's right about one thing. Need to think careful about what's coming." "What do you mean?" Isabel asked softly. "Railroad's got money for fancy lawyers. They've bought judges before in other towns." His hands tightened on the reins. "Don't want to bring trouble to you or the children. Maybe it would be best if I left." Isabel finished for him. "Is that what you're thinking?" Liam kept his eyes on the road. "Would be safer." "Safer isn't always right," Isabel said. "My grandmother taught me that too. She said sometimes God puts us exactly where the storm is worst because that's where we're needed most." They rode in silence for several moments before she spoke again. "We should pray about it. Prayer and courage together. That's what my mama always said we need in hard times." A ghost of a smile touched Liam's lips. "Sounds like your mama and grandmother were wise women." That evening, after helping Mary settle Jonas into bed with a slight fever, Isabel knelt beside her own bed in the small guest room. Lamplight cast dancing shadows on the wall as she bowed her head. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't know if this is where you mean for me to stay, but I know you didn't bring me all this way for nothing. Please give us strength for whatever's coming. Help us know what's right. And Lord—" She paused, thinking of Liam's quiet strength and the children's trusting faces. "Protect this family that's shown me kindness when I needed it most." The house creaked softly in the winter night as she rose from her knees. Through her window, she could see stars scattered across the vast Nebraska sky, bright and steady as God's promises. Dawn crept over the farmstead like a whispered prayer. Frost painted delicate patterns on the window panes as Isabel pulled her shawl tight and stepped into the crisp morning air. The chicken coop waited, its weathered boards holding promises of fresh eggs for breakfast. Mary and Jonas trailed behind her, their small boots crunching in the snow. Mary held the woven basket while Jonas bounced on his toes, eager to help despite his lingering fever. "Careful now," Isabel cautioned as they approached the roosting hens. "Gentle hands gather the best eggs." Mary nodded seriously, but Jonas giggled when a plump red hen clucked at him. "She's saying good morning," he declared. Through the morning mist they could see Liam's tall figure by the well, his broad-brimmed hat dark against the pale sky. He worked the handle, but the bucket came up nearly empty again. The sight made Isabel's heart heavy. Water was life out here on the prairie. Back in the warm kitchen, Isabel showed the children how to check each egg for cracks before setting them in the storage box. The cast-iron stove radiated welcome heat as she stirred a pot of steaming porridge. Liam entered, stamping snow from his boots. His face carried the weight of worry as he settled at the table. "Got papers from town yesterday," he said quietly, while the children spooned honey over their breakfast. "Judge wants to see me next week about the land claim." Isabel set a steaming cup of coffee before him. "Then we'll be ready," she said firmly. "We cannot give up what's rightfully yours." "Ain't that simple?" Liam replied, but something in her steady gaze made him pause. Later that morning, while the children practiced their letters indoors, Liam split wood behind the barn. The rhythmic thunk of the axe marked time like a heartbeat. Isabel approached, carrying a jug of water. He paused, leaning on the axe handle. "Sarah, my late wife, she kept all our papers organized neat as pins. Land deeds, banknotes, everything." His voice grew rough. "She knew how to handle such things properly. Me, I'm just a simple farmer. What chance do I have against railroad lawyers and corrupt judges?" Isabel set down the water jug. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. "If God brought me here, it wasn't to run at the first sign of trouble." The axe handle creaked under his grip. "Ain't right to expect you to fight my battles." "Perhaps they're our battles now," she answered. Before Liam could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Jacob Miller, their nearest neighbor 3 miles west, rode up on his dappled mare. "Liam," he called, dismounting stiffly. "Thought you ought to know. Henderson's lost their place yesterday. Railroad men showed up with papers and armed deputies. Gave them 2 hours to clear out." Isabel listened intently as Jacob described how other farmers had been forced off their land. Midnight visits from masked men, mysterious fires, cattle found dead in their pastures. She committed each detail to memory, her resolve hardening like steel in a forge. "Much obliged for the warning," Liam said as Jacob mounted up to leave. "We'll be careful." The afternoon light was fading when they gathered for supper. Mary had helped Isabel bake fresh bread, its yeasty aroma filling the kitchen. Jonas sat in his usual spot, his fever finally broken, chattering about the chicken that had pecked his boot that morning. Liam cleared his throat. "Miss Isabel," he said formally, "I want to thank you for your courage today." Most folks would have packed their bags after hearing Jacob's news. She looked up from serving the stew, meeting his eyes in the warm lamplight. "My grandmother used to say courage grows where kindness is sown. You showed me kindness when no one else would." A quiet smile passed between them, genuine as a promise. Mary and Jonas watched the exchange with bright eyes, sensing something important in the moment. The lamp flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the farmhouse. Outside, the vast prairie stretched dark and silent under countless stars, but inside, the kitchen glowed with warmth and shared purpose. They were no longer just 4 separate souls seeking shelter. They were becoming something stronger. A family ready to stand together. A week passed like wind across the prairie. The morning dawned grey and cold when Isabel heard unusual sounds from Jonas's room, labored breathing and soft whimpers. She hurried down the narrow hallway, her heart quickening with each step. Jonas lay tangled in his quilts, his small face flushed bright red. When she touched his forehead, the heat radiating from his skin made her gasp. "Mary!" she called softly to the girl, watching from the doorway. "Fetch your uncle, quick now." Liam appeared moments later, still pulling on his coat. His face paled when he saw Jonas thrashing weakly in the bed. "He was fine at supper," he whispered, pressing a rough hand to the boy's cheek. "He's burning up," Isabel said, her voice tight with worry. She knew well how swiftly fever could turn deadly out here, miles from proper medical help. The nearest doctor was half a day's ride away in good weather. Liam grabbed his hat. "I'll saddle the horse, ride for Doc Wilson." "Wait." Isabel caught his arm. "The storm's coming in." "Look." Through the window, dark clouds roiled on the horizon. "You could get lost in that, or worse." She straightened her shoulders, remembering her grandmother's teachings. "I know some ways to help. My grandmother showed me which herbs can fight fever." Liam hesitated, torn between tradition and trust. Finally, he nodded. "Tell me what you need." "Willow bark from the creek bed," she said, "and Mary, bring me clean cloths and cool water from the well." While Liam trudged through the gathering storm to the creek, Isabel set Mary to work tearing strips of cloth. She spoke softly to Jonas, wiping his hot face with cool water. "Stay with us, little one," she murmured. "We're not letting you go." When Liam returned, snow dusting his broad shoulders, Isabel quickly prepared the willow bark tea just as her grandmother had taught her. She measured carefully, steeping the bark in hot water until it released its healing properties. "This will taste bitter," she warned Jonas, supporting his head while he sipped. "But it will help the fever, just like medicine from the doctor." Through the long afternoon and into the night, Isabel refused to leave Jonas's bedside. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths, sang soft Cherokee lullabies her grandmother had taught her, and coaxed him to take more willow bark tea whenever he stirred. Liam brought her coffee and bread, but she barely touched either, her attention fixed on every change in Jonas's breathing. As evening deepened into night, Liam settled into the chair beside her. "You should rest," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I promised him I'd stay. her voice caught. "He reminds me of my little brother before the fever took him. I won't lose another child I love." Liam's hand found hers in the lamplight, rough and warm. They sat together through the dark hours, watching and waiting. Near dawn, Jonas's breathing finally eased. Isabel's gentle touch found his forehead cooler, his sleep more peaceful. "The fever's breaking," she whispered, tears of relief sliding down her cheeks. Liam's voice was hoarse with emotion. "You saved him. You saved my family." When Jonas opened his eyes later that morning, asking weakly for breakfast, Isabel's legs nearly gave out from relief. She retreated to the kitchen to compose herself, and Liam followed. "Before you came," he said slowly, watching her knead dough for fresh bread, "I asked God to send help. Not just for the land fight, but for us, the children and me. We were struggling, more than I let on." Isabel's hands stilled in the dough, her cheeks warming. She thought of that day at the train platform, how close she'd come to fleeing back east. Instead, she'd found something she'd never expected, a place where she was needed, valued, even cherished. That evening, with Jonas propped up on pillows and colour returning to his cheeks, Mary tugged at Isabel's skirts. "Please sing for us again?" she asked. "The song about the dove?" Isabel settled into the rocking chair, gathering both children close. Her voice rose soft and clear in the quiet house, singing of peace and hope and coming home. The familiar hymn filled every corner of the room with its gentle promise. In the doorway, Liam stood listening, his face softened by more than just gratitude. Something deeper shone in his eyes as he watched Isabel with his sister's children, something that looked remarkably like admiration, and perhaps the first tender shoots of love. The winter sun had barely cleared the horizon when Liam approached Isabel in the farmhouse kitchen. He cleared his throat softly, adjusting his broad-brimmed hat in his hands. Would you join us for worship today? The meeting house isn't far." Isabel's hands stilled over the morning's dishes. Her heart fluttered at the invitation, a step deeper into Liam's world. "I'd be honored," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The children bounced with excitement as they loaded into the wagon. Mary helped Isabel wrap thick quilts around their legs, while Jonas snuggled between them. Liam clicked his tongue, and the horses set off, their breath creating clouds in the crisp morning air. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as they travelled. Isabel watched the winter landscape roll past, fields dusted with snow, bare trees reaching toward the pale sky. Other wagons appeared on the road, all heading the same direction. Each carried families dressed in plain, dark clothing, the women in bonnets, the men in broad hats like Liam's. The meeting house stood simple and stark against the winter sky. No steeple pierced the heavens, no coloured glass adorned the windows. Just clean lines and weathered wood, humble as a prayer. Isabel smoothed her plainest dress, suddenly conscious of how different she looked from the slim Amish women filing inside. Inside, wooden benches lined the room in straight rows. No pictures adorned the walls, no instruments waited to accompany the singing. The simplicity felt both foreign and peaceful to Isabel. She settled beside Mary, who squeezed her hand reassuringly. When the congregation began to sing, the sound swelled pure and unaccompanied. Isabel recognized the hymn from her childhood church. Without thinking, she joined in, her voice rising clear and strong above the others. The familiar words filled her with unexpected joy. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Heads turned. Some faces showed surprise, others appreciation. Isabel nearly faltered, but then she saw Liam watching her, his eyes warm with pride. She kept singing, letting her voice carry her grandmother's teaching that God's grace embraced all his children, no matter their size or shape. After the service, several women approached. An elderly one with kind eyes touched Isabel's arm. "Such a gift you have," she said warmly. "Will you join our quilting circle next week?" But not all reactions were welcoming. Isabel caught whispers behind raised hands. rather large for an Amish wife. Can she even work the fields? The words stung, familiar as thorns. Loading the wagon for the journey home, Isabel's hands trembled slightly. Liam noticed. He helped her up to the seat, then spoke quietly. They saw what I see. Your heart. His words wrapped around her like a warm shawl. That's what matters here. Isabel gazed across the snowy fields, considering. I'm beginning to believe I belong here, she admitted softly. Not just on the farm, but here, in this life. The ride home felt shorter, warmer despite the winter chill. Jonas dozed against her shoulder while Mary hummed, hymns under her breath. The sun hung low when they finally pulled up to the farmhouse. That evening, they gathered around the kitchen table for a simple supper of bread, stew, and apple pie Isabel had baked the day before. The children's excitement about church bubbled over. Did you hear Miss Isabel sing? Mary asked, her eyes shining. Even Elder Yoda smiled. Jonas nodded eagerly. And Mrs. Miller said we should bring Miss Isabel's pie to the next fellowship dinner. Isabel felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the steaming stew. Here, ladling second helpings into eager bowls, listening to the children chatter, catching Liam's quiet smiles. She felt it settling into her very bones. Acceptance, belonging, the very things she'd traveled so far to find. The evening passed in gentle conversation and shared tasks. As Isabel taught Mary to dry the dishes properly, as Jonas helped Liam bring in more firewood, as they all gathered for evening prayers, she felt the last walls around her heart beginning to soften. This plain life, these simple moments, they were weaving themselves into the fabric of her soul, creating something new and precious. Later, as the children climbed the stairs to bed, Liam paused beside her at the kitchen window. Together, they watched the moon rise over the snow-covered fields, casting long shadows across their shared land. No words were needed in that moment of peaceful understanding. They had found something neither expected, a family forming, day by day, prayer by prayer, song by song. Days settled into a comfortable rhythm at the Stoltzfus farm. Each morning, Isabel rose before dawn, her footsteps quiet on the wooden floors as she made her way to the kitchen. The familiar tasks brought peace, stoking the cookstove, kneading bread dough, preparing breakfast before the others stirred. Outside, frost sparkled on fence posts while chickens scratched in the yard. Isabel carried feed to the animals, her breath visible in the winter air. The barn cats wound around her ankles as she distributed grain and fresh hay. Even the horses seemed to recognize her now, nickering softly when she approached their stalls. Inside, she kept busy with mending and sewing. Her needle flew through fabric as she patched Jonas's worn trousers and let out the hem of Mary's dress. The quiet work allowed her mind to wander, planning improvements for the homestead. She had already organized the root cellar and begun preserving what remained of the fall harvest. One crisp afternoon, as Isabel hung laundry on the line, she spotted a wagon approaching. The vehicle bounced along the rutted road, driven by a woman she recognized from town, Mrs. Parker, the local midwife. The older woman pulled her team to a halt near the fence. "Miss Isabel?" Mrs. Parker called out, her face drawn with worry. "I've come seeking help." The Watson children. Their parents succumbed to fever 3 days past. They need somewhere to stay while arrangements are made. Isabel's heart clenched at the news. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. "Of course they can come here." "We have room." Mrs. Parker's shoulders sagged with relief. "I knew you would understand." "They're in the wagon. Sarah's 6 and Thomas is 4. Poor lambs haven't spoken much since." Isabel was already moving toward the wagon. 2 small figures huddled beneath a woolen blanket, their faces pale and frightened. "Hello, little ones," she said softly. "Would you like some hot cocoa? I just baked cookies this morning." The children peered at her uncertainly. The girl, Sarah, clutched her brother's hand. But when Isabel held out her arms, Thomas scrambled toward her, seeking comfort. Sarah followed more slowly, but accepted Isabel's gentle touch. Liam returned from mending fences to find 4 children at his kitchen table, instead of 2. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Isabel moved efficiently between stove and table, serving cups of cocoa while keeping up a soothing stream of conversation. Mary had already taken Sarah under her wing, showing her a rag doll, while Jonas and Thomas built with wooden blocks on the floor. That evening, they gathered in front of the fire. The Watson children sat close to Isabel, drawn to her warmth and gentle manner. Mary and Jonas made room, accepting the newcomers with the simple kindness of youth. "Tell us a story," Jonas pleaded. "One from when you were little." Isabel smiled, settling more comfortably in her chair. "Well, when I was about Mary's age, my grandmother taught me about the stars. She knew all their stories. Her voice painted pictures of summer nights spent learning constellation patterns, of Cherokee legends about how Bear chased the stars across the sky, of wisdom passed down through generations. The children listened, entranced. Even little Thomas stopped fidgeting, his eyes growing heavy as he leaned against Isabel's side. Sarah's tight shoulders gradually relaxed as the story continued. Soon, soft laughter filled the room, the first time the Watson children had smiled since losing their parents. Liam watched from his chair, something warming in his chest. The house felt different now, filled with life and purpose. Since losing his wife, the rooms had held only echoes of happiness. But Isabel had changed that, bringing light back into dark corners, making the farmhouse feel like home again. After the children were tucked into bed, Sarah and Thomas sharing the spare room, Liam found Isabel in the kitchen. She was preparing things for breakfast, her movements sure and practiced despite her short time there. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking them in without question, for knowing what to do." Isabel paused in her work, turning to face him. "They needed us. How could I say no?" "You've made this house a home," Liam admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't realize how empty it was until you filled it." Color rose in Isabel's cheeks, but her eyes shone with happiness at his words. Still, a shadow crossed her face as she glanced toward the window, where darkness pressed against the glass. She knew their troubles weren't over. The railroad's threats still loomed, and winter held its own challenges. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to feel the joy of belonging, of creating a home where healing could begin. The winter morning dawned clear and cold, frost etching delicate patterns on the farmhouse windows. Isabel hummed softly while kneading bread dough in the warm kitchen, her thoughts peaceful as she watched Mary help Jonas practice his letters at the table. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention to the window. A wagon she didn't recognize pulled up to the fence. The driver, bundled against the cold, called out, "Letter for Miss Isabel!" She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, surprised. Who would be writing to her? The courier handed her an envelope and tipped his hat before turning his wagon around. Isabel's fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. The paper inside bore elegant handwriting, but the words made her stomach clench. "Dear Giant," the letter began mockingly. "I trust you're enjoying your role as the Amish giant's burden. How fitting that a man who wears black would take in such a dark cloud. Perhaps he keeps you around to shade his crops in summer." The cruel words blurred as tears filled her eyes. It was signed by Theodore Maxwell, the rancher who had rejected and humiliated her at the train station. Isabel's hands shook as she read the letter again, each word cutting deeper than the last. She didn't hear Liam's footsteps behind her until his quiet voice asked, "Isabel, what's wrong?" Startled, she tried to hide the letter, but it slipped from her trembling fingers. Liam caught it before it could blow away in the winter wind. His face grew serious as he read, his jaw tightening with each line. "This man," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "has no right to judge what he cannot understand." He folded the letter deliberately, looking at Isabel with gentle concern. "Were you going to tell me about this?" Isabel wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. "I was going to burn it," she admitted. I thought I was past caring what people like him think of me, but the words still hurt. Liam stepped closer, his presence steady and reassuring. "Don't let cruel words cut deeper than truth," he said softly. "His letter shows his own smallness, not yours." "But I am large," Isabel whispered, voicing the shame that had followed her for years. "I've always been too big, too much. Everyone has always." "You are perfect as you are," Liam interrupted firmly, his blue eyes intense with conviction. "Perfect for this farm, perfect for the children, perfect in God's eyes and mine." Isabel's breath caught at the certainty in his voice. She looked down at her hands, strong hands that could knead bread, tend sick children, and work the land, hands that had found purpose here. Later that evening, while preparing supper, Isabel paused in stirring the stew. Steam rose from the pot as Liam's words echoed in her mind. "Perfect as you are." The phrase settled deep in her heart, different from every cruel word that had come before. She glanced across the kitchen to where Liam sat by the hearth, helping Jonas with a wooden puzzle. He looked up, catching her gaze, and something warm and tender passed between them. For the first time, Isabel truly believed what he saw in her. Not a burden, but a blessing. Not too much, but exactly enough. The Watson children had fallen asleep early, worn out from playing in the snow. Mary sat nearby, carefully stitching a sampler by lamplight. The scene was peaceful, domestic, everything Isabel had dreamed of but never thought she deserved. "The stew smells good," Liam said softly, coming to stand beside her at the stove. His presence was comfortable now, familiar in a way that made her heart flutter. "My grandmother's recipe," Isabel replied, stirring the pot. "She always said good food feeds more than the body, it feeds the soul too." She was wise. Liam nodded, then added quietly, "Like her granddaughter." Their eyes met again, and this time Isabel didn't look away. The kitchen was warm and golden in the lamplight, filled with the aroma of cooking and the soft sounds of Mary's needle pulling thread. In that moment, Isabel felt the last of her old shame begin to melt away, replaced by something new and precious, acceptance, belonging, and perhaps even love. The deep winter hit Nebraska hard that year. Ice crusted over the farm's wells, and each morning Liam had to break through frozen layers just to draw enough water for the animals. Isabel watched him struggle with the stubborn pump handle, her breath misting in the frigid air. "We need supplies," Liam announced one morning, stamping snow from his boots by the door. "And there's a revival service in town tonight. I reckon we should go." Isabel's stomach tightened at the thought of facing the townspeople again, but she nodded. They couldn't hide away forever. The children needed warm clothes, and the pantry was running low. They set out after midday in the wagon, wrapped in quilts against the biting wind. The winter sun hung low and pale in the sky, offering little warmth. Mary and Jonas huddled close to Isabel, sharing their body heat as the wagon creaked over the frozen ground. Main Street was busy with other farmers come to town for supplies and the revival. Isabel kept her head high as they passed the spot where she'd first been humiliated. She felt stronger now, changed by weeks of honest work and growing acceptance at the homestead. The general store was warm and crowded. While Liam gathered supplies, Isabel helped the children pick out new mittens. She noticed fewer hostile stares than before, though whispers still followed her movements. As evening approached, they made their way to the small white church on the edge of town. Lanterns glowed in its windows, and the building was already filling with settlers seeking warmth and fellowship. Isabel hesitated at the entrance, but Liam's steady presence beside her gave her courage. They found seats near the back. The wooden pews were hard and cold, but the press of bodies soon warmed the space. Isabel recognized faces in the crowd, some who had laughed at her that first day, others who had turned away. Her former intended sat near the front, deliberately not looking back. The preacher was a traveling man, his voice strong as he spoke of redemption and God's love for all his children. When he called for hymns, Isabel's heart began to pound. Music had always been her refuge, a gift from her mother who had taught her to sing praise even in dark times. The first notes of Amazing Grace rose from the congregation, somewhat tentative in the cold air. Isabel closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and let her voice soar. The sound that filled the church was pure and powerful, rising above the other voices like a shaft of sunlight through storm clouds. Her voice carried all her pain, her hope, her gratitude for second chances. The congregation faltered, then fell silent, letting her voice alone fill the sacred space. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Tears began to flow down cheeks throughout the church. Even those who had mocked her sat transfixed. Liam stood tall beside her, his face proud as she sang verse after verse, her voice growing stronger with each line. When the final note faded, silence held for a long moment. Then someone began to clap. The applause spread through the church like ripples on water, accompanied by murmurs of appreciation and wonder. After the service, people approached her with changed faces. Mrs. Thompson, who had turned away from her in the store just weeks ago, clasped her hands warmly. "That was a blessing," she said, wiping her eyes. "Pure blessing." Even the preacher came to thank her, saying her voice had touched hearts more deeply than his sermon. Isabel accepted their words gracefully, sensing the genuine change in their attitudes. The mockery that had haunted the town's whispers was replaced by something like respect. The wagon ride home was peaceful under a sky thick with stars. Jonas had fallen asleep against Isabel's shoulder, and Mary dozed wrapped in quilts. The horses' hooves made soft sounds in the snow. "You showed them something tonight," Liam said quietly. "Something more than just fine singing." "What do you mean?" Isabel asked, though warmth spread through her chest at his words. "You showed them courage. Standing up there, letting your voice rise despite everything that happened before, it gives folks hope, makes them believe that maybe justice can win after all, even against big odds." Isabel thought about this as they rode through the darkness. She had come to this town seeking belonging, only to find rejection. But now, somehow, she had found not just acceptance, but purpose. Her grandmother had always said that the Creator worked in circles, bringing good from pain if you stayed faithful. Looking at the sleeping children, at Liam's strong profile in the starlight, at the homestead waiting ahead, Isabel felt her purpose strengthen like a young tree putting. Down deep roots. Whatever challenges lay ahead, with the cattle syndicate, the railroad, or the town, she was ready to face them with song in her heart and faith in her step. The morning dawned grey and bitter, frost etching delicate patterns on the farmhouse windows. Isabel had just begun stoking the kitchen fire when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching. Her heart jumped as she peered through the window. 6 riders emerged from the misty dawn, their forms dark against the pale sky. Deputy Crowder led the group, his badge glinting dully. Behind him rode several rough-looking men she recognized as syndicate hands, their guns prominent on their hips. "Liam!" she called out, her voice tight with worry. He appeared from the barn, where he'd been doing early chores, and stood straight as the riders approached. Deputy Crowder dismounted, his boots crunching on frozen ground. "Liam Stoltzfus," he drawled, pulling a paper from his coat. "You're under arrest for criminal trespass on railroad property." "That's nonsense," Liam said quietly but firmly. "These lands are deeded to me, proper and legal. Tell it to the judge." The deputy's smile was cold as the morning. 2 syndicate men dismounted, chains rattling in their hands. Isabel rushed forward. "You can't do this. We have papers proving our rights to this land." Deputy Crowder's hand shot out, shoving her roughly aside. She stumbled, catching herself against the porch rail. "Stay out of this, woman!" he snarled. "This here's a matter of law." The children appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. Mary clutched Jonas's shoulder, both their faces pale with fear. Liam glanced at them, then at Isabel, his eyes conveying what his Amish principles of non-violence wouldn't let him say aloud. "It's all right," he said softly as the men clapped iron manacles around his wrists. "God sees the truth." Isabel watched helplessly as they hauled him onto a horse, chains binding his hands to the saddle horn. The deputy tipped his hat mockingly. "Better start packing, ma'am. This land'll be railroad property soon enough." The riders wheeled their horses around, kicking up clods of frozen earth as they galloped away. Liam's straight back was the last thing Isabel saw before the morning mist swallowed them. Mary and Jonas ran to her, crying. She gathered them close, her own tears threatening to fall. "Hush now," she whispered, though her voice shook. "We're going to be brave. We're going to help your uncle." The day passed in a blur of worry and routine chores that had to be done despite their fear. Animals needed feeding, eggs needed gathering, meals needed cooking. Isabel kept the children close, trying to maintain normalcy even as her mind raced with plans and prayers. Evening came too slowly. After a simple supper that none of them could really eat, Isabel tucked the children into bed. Jonas clung to her sleeve. "When's Uncle Liam coming home?" "Soon, little one," she said, smoothing his hair. "We just need to pray hard and trust in the Lord." Mary's eyes were older than her years. "Are they going to take our farm?" "No," Isabel said firmly, though her heart ached. "Your uncle has proper papers for this land. We just need to prove it." She sang them a hymn, her voice catching on the familiar words of comfort and hope. Only when their breathing steadied into sleep did she allow herself to leave their room. The farmhouse felt vast and empty without Liam's steady presence. His chair sat vacant by the hearth, his Bible still open on the side table where he'd left it that morning. The quiet pressed in around her like a physical weight. Isabel sank to her knees beside Liam's chair, clasping her hands in desperate prayer. "Lord," she whispered, "give me strength. Show me the way to help him. He defended me when no one else would. Now I must defend him." The lamp flame flickered, casting long shadows on the wall. Isabel remained kneeling, pouring out her heart to God. She prayed for Liam's safety, for wisdom to fight this battle, for courage to face whatever came next. Finally, she rose, her knees stiff from the hard floor. The man who had called her perfect, who had seen worth in her when others saw only size, who had offered shelter and respect without demand. He needed her now. She would not fail him. Determination settled over her like a mantle. Tomorrow she would begin her fight. She would find a way to uncover the truth, to expose the syndicate's lies, to bring Liam home where he belonged. The deputy and his corrupt allies might have the law on their side, but Isabel had faith, truth, and a love for this family that gave her strength she never knew she possessed. She banked the fire for the night, her movements deliberate and sure despite her aching heart. The farmhouse might feel empty, but she would fill it with courage and hope until Liam returned. Dawn broke cold and clear over the farmhouse. Isabel had barely slept, her mind churning with worry for Liam. She remembered his words from weeks ago about how his late wife had kept their important papers safe. But where? After getting Mary and Jonas settled with their morning chores, Isabel began searching the house methodically. She checked cupboards and drawers, finding only household items and worn letters. In Liam's bedroom, she hesitated, feeling like an intruder. But necessity drove her forward. A wooden chest sat beneath the bed, its dark wood worn smooth with age. Isabel pulled it out, her hands trembling as she lifted the heavy lid. Inside, beneath carefully folded quilts, she found a leather portfolio tied with string. Her heart leapt as she opened it. There, preserved between sheets of thick paper, lay the documents they desperately needed. Land deeds with Liam's name clearly written, water rights filings dated years before the railroad's claims, and property surveys marked with official seals. Isabel's hands shook as she gathered them carefully. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, knowing these papers might save their home. She packed the documents securely in her satchel and prepared the wagon for travel. The winter wind bit fierce as she set out, Mary and Jonas safely left in Mrs. Parker's daughter's care. The wooden wheels creaked over frozen ground as she guided the horses toward the Cherokee settlement 3 miles east. The small cluster of homes appeared through bare trees, smoke rising from stone chimneys. Isabel remembered Liam speaking of these neighbors with respect, telling how he had stood with them against railroad threats the previous spring. Walking Bear's wife Sarah met her at the door of their cabin. The Cherokee woman's dark eyes showed instant concern. Something has happened to the quiet man? Isabel explained Liam's arrest and their need for witnesses. Sarah called her husband, and they listened intently. He spoke for us when others would not. Walking Bear said firmly, "We will speak for him now. The railroad men tried to say we had no right to our spring. Liam brought his own papers to show the judge how the water flowed through all our lands together." Tears of gratitude filled Isabel's eyes. "Your words might save his freedom." Sarah pressed a bundle of dried herbs into Isabel's hands. "For strength," she said softly. "You have a warrior's heart in this fight." The sun was setting when Isabel finally reached town, her bones aching from the cold journey. Mrs. Parker was waiting at her door, a lamp glowing welcome in the window. "Land's sake, girl, you must be frozen through." The older woman hurried her inside to the warmth of the kitchen stove. That night, Isabel lay in Mrs. Parker's spare room, the precious documents, secured beneath her pillow. Her body was exhausted, but hope had taken root in her heart. Tomorrow she would begin the real work of freeing Liam and saving their home. The courthouse buzzed with tension that morning. Every wooden bench creaked under the weight of spectators. Near the front, railroad men and syndicate bosses lounged with easy confidence, their expensive coats marking them apart from the plain-clothed farmers who filled the back rows. Isabel stood straight despite her trembling hands, her simple brown dress neat and pressed. The documents felt heavy in her satchel as she waited for the case to be called. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers, but she fixed her eyes forward, remembering Liam's words, "You are perfect as you are." Judge Harrison, a stern-faced woman with steel-gray hair, called the case. Matter of railroad development versus Stoltzfus property claims. The syndicate's lawyer rose first, his voice booming through the packed room. "Your Honor, the defendant has illegally occupied land designated for railroad expansion. We demand immediate, if it please the court—" Isabel interrupted, her voice clear and steady. "I have evidence proving Mr. Stoltzfus's rightful ownership." The judge peered over her spectacles. "Step forward." Isabel approached the bench, unfolding the deeds and water rights documents with careful hands. "These papers show the land was legally purchased and recorded 5 years before any railroad claims." Judge Harrison studied each document intently while the courthouse held its breath. The syndicate lawyer shifted uneasily, his earlier smugness fading. "I call Walking Bear and Sarah of the Cherokee settlement," Isabel announced. The couple walked forward, dignified in their Sunday best, heads held high. Walking Bear spoke first, his words measured and true. "Last spring, when railroad men threatened our water rights, Liam Stoltzfus stood with us. He showed the same papers to prove how the creek served all our lands together. He chose justice over easy profit." Sarah added softly, "He is a man of honor. His words stand strong like old trees." Murmurs rippled through the courthouse. Isabel saw several townspeople nodding, their expressions softening. The syndicate lawyer jumped up, face red. "Your Honor, these simple farmers cannot possibly understand the complex legal—" "I understand quite well." Judge Harrison cut him off sharply. "These deeds are legitimate and properly filed. The water rights are clear." She straightened her papers with a decisive snap. "Case dismissed. Mr. Stoltzfus is to be released immediately." Gasps echoed through the room. The bailiff moved to unlock Liam's chains. He stood slowly, dignity intact, despite his wrinkled clothes and unshaven face. Isabel could not help herself. She rushed forward, tears streaming down her cheeks as Liam enfolded her in his arms. For a moment, the courthouse disappeared. There was only his warmth, his whispered, "Thank you," and the certainty that she had found her true home. When they finally stepped apart, Isabel noticed the changed looks from the townspeople. Gone were the mocking smirks and cruel whispers. Instead, she saw respect in their eyes, even admiration. She was no longer just the rejected mail-order bride. She was the woman who had faced down powerful men to save an innocent farmer and his land. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows, catching the tears on Isabel's cheeks and making them shine like diamonds. Spring sunlight streamed through the plain windows of the Amish meeting house, casting gentle warmth across wooden pews filled with familiar faces. The simple room had been swept clean, with only a few wildflowers in tin cups marking the special occasion. Children fidgeted in their Sunday best, while neighbors and townsfolk sat shoulder to shoulder, divisions forgotten in the spirit of the day. Near the front, Walking Bear and Sarah sat with quiet dignity, their presence a bridge between worlds. Other Cherokee friends had joined them, their colorful shawls bright against the plain walls. Even those who had once mocked Isabel now sat with heads bowed, humbled by her courage and grace. Mary and Jonas could barely contain their excitement, their faces glowing as they watched the door. The boy who had survived fever thanks to Isabel's care now clutched a small bouquet of prairie flowers. His sister smoothed her dress for the 10th time, proud to be helping with her new mother's wedding. When Isabel appeared in the doorway, a collective breath swept through the room. She wore a modest dress of deep blue, sewn by her own hands. Though simple in design, it fit her perfectly, celebrating rather than hiding her form. Her dark hair was braided with tiny white flowers, and her cheeks glowed with joy rather than shame. Liam stood at the front, tall and steady in his black suit and broad hat. His eyes never left Isabel as she walked toward him, each step carrying her further from the pain of that first day at the train station. The same townsfolk who had witnessed her rejection now watched her triumph, seeing at last what Liam had seen all along. The minister spoke of faith, hope, and love. But it was the personal vows that brought tears to every eye. Liam took Isabel's hands in his voice carrying clear and true through the quiet room. "You came to us like an answer to prayer," he said softly. "You brought healing to our home, courage to our hearts, and love beyond measure." His eyes met hers with deep tenderness. "You were never too much. You were always just enough." Isabel's voice trembled, but held strong as she responded. "You saw me when others turned away. You offered dignity when I faced shame. Through you I learned that God's love has no measure, and neither does mine for you and our family." As they exchanged rings, Mary and Jonas stepped forward, joining their hands with their parents. The sight of the family united brought fresh tears and smiles to the witnesses. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, spontaneous applause filled the meeting house, mixed with joyful tears and calls of blessing. The celebration moved to the farmhouse, where tables groaned under the weight of shared dishes. Cherokee fry bread sat beside Amish pies, while bowls of stew and platters of roasted meat fed the happy crowd. Children played in the yard, their laughter carrying across the prairie. Former enemies shared benches and stories, finding common ground in the peace of the day. As evening approached, guests began to depart with final hugs and well wishes. The last golden light of day painted the snow-dusted prairie in gentle hues. Isabel stood at the window, remembering that first cold ride from the train station, how far they had come since that day of rejection and rescue. With practiced care, she lit the oil lamp and placed it in the window, its warm glow pushing back the gathering dusk. The simple act felt like a prayer, a beacon of hope for others who might be searching for home. Liam's steps creaked on the floorboards as he joined her. His arm slipped around her shoulders, strong and sure. Together they gazed out at their land, at the promise of spring hiding beneath the snow. The creek would flow again, the fields would green, and their love would continue to grow, season after season. In the lamp's gentle light, Isabel saw their reflection in the window glass. No longer the rejected bride and lonely widower, but a family made whole through faith, courage, and the power of seeing the truth in each other's hearts. The peace in their hearts glowed as steady as the lamp's flame, lighting the way forward into their shared tomorrow. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.